IDC International Radio, 106.2 FM, from Israel to the world.
Special interviews, highlights, and live broadcasts from ICT's annual international conference.
Hello and welcome to IDC International Radio 106.2 FM. I'm Sabrina Zeloof and we're covering the 17th Annual World Summit on Counter-Terrorism. With me in the studio is Assistant Commissioner Alistair Sutherland, so thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Sabrina. Thank you very much for the welcome.
It's a pleasure. So you are Assistant Commissioner of City of London Police.
That's correct.
Okay. Tell us a bit about your background. How did you get to the police force?
Okay. Well, I'm in my 32nd year of police service.
Wow, you look much younger than that.
Thank you very much. I should give you the money later. I'm in my 32nd year. I joined the Metropolitan Police at Scotland Yard 1986, so nearly 32 years ago. And I served 30 years with the Metropolitan Police, starting off as a beat officer, like all officers do, and then gradually working my way through promotion, through sergeant and inspector, through to the position I am now. I was fortunate enough during my time in the Metropolitan Police to hold some very interesting roles. I was in charge of policing London's busiest borough for crime. And
which borough is that?
It was Lambeth Borough.
Okay.
So Brixton, Kennington, Waterloo, Stockwell, etc., which was a really interesting time as a chief superintendent. I was promoted as a commander, and I was fortunate enough to be able to have the opportunity to make some major changes within the force to implement recommendations from the Stockwell report around command and control. I was in charge of CO19 specialist firearms, and I was also part of the Olympic command team in 2012.
Wow,
so that was
that's
a
huge
privilege.
responsibility.
It was a huge responsibility, but
I
also
remember
a
at the
huge
time that
privilege.
but a lot of talk of, is it safe? You know, like people always associate big events, or especially in Israel, with a terror threat.
Of course, and we considered that as you would expect, and we did a huge amount of planning. And of course, success in an event really is in the planning, and we did a lot of that. So the Olympics was a real highlight of my career. And I was then fortunate enough to be asked to be a commander for Royalty, Diplomatic Specialist and Parliamentary Protection. So I spent 2 years in that role before.
So what does that mean?
It means that I'm in charge of the physical security and personal protection for all of the people within those commands. So the royal family, for government ministers that are protected, for Parliament, etc. So the physical infrastructure, protective security, and the people, which was, again, a huge privilege. I was very lucky.
Wow. And so explain the difference between the Metropolitan Police, so that's Scotland Yard, I think, and City of London Police.
Okay, so there are three forces that work across London: the Metropolitan Police, the City of London Police, and the British Transport Police. The City of London Police is the force that is responsible for policing the very, very heart of London, so only the 1.2 square miles of the old City of London.
Okay, is that the financial district?
It is indeed. So
okay.
The City of London Police were formed in 1839. The Metropolitan Police, as we know, were formed in 1829, so we're 10 years younger. But some would say in terms of sort of enforcement of law and order, we go back a long way beyond that. So we are responsible for that small area of the centre of London, but we work very, very closely with the Met and British Transport Police. And you'll have seen, unfortunately, the recent terror attack on London Bridge, where the three forces, the Met, the City and BTP, came together as one to provide, we think, a very, very effective response to that attack.
Sure. Now, we're speaking about the attack that was on the bridge a couple of months ago. How do you think, if we look back to 9/11 and then to 7/7 and now more recent events, police were once associated with dealing with crime. Terror was seen, or at least in Israel, terror is perhaps more military focused. But how has the British police force in general had to make that shift in response to terror as well as crime?
Okay, it's a really interesting question. If you were at the conference on Monday, you'll have heard Mark Rowley, the Assistant Commissioner Specialist Operations in charge of the whole of UK terrorism, mention the fact that in the 1880s, Scotland Yard was attacked and blown up by Irish terrorists.
By the IRA.
So exactly. So back in the 1880s, the London police had a focus on terrorism at that very early stage. Well, of course, through the decades, the threat has evolved and changed. And the major threat for the 20th century for London was from Irish Republican terrorism, and of course policing had to focus time, money and resources into combating that threat, and it was a very existential threat, as we know, and lots of people lost their lives here or in London and across the UK. The threat then, after the ceasefire and the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement, evolved into, as we know, the late 80s and early 90s Islamic terrorism. And certainly the 7/7 bombings of 2005 really made us rethink how we dealt with terrorism in London, and reinvested more resources, time and money and strategy and thought. And the government have a very, very comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy that the police work to. It's called the Contest Strategy. Consists of 4 elements: protect, prepare, pursue and prevent. And those are 4 pillars under which the police support UK government and the intelligence services to combat terrorism. And of course, latterly, we've seen less of what you would call the more organised threat posed by Al-Qaeda, for example, into more of a disparate and lone wolf style of threat from lone actors who are inspired by ISIS from across the globe.
Right, there's a lot of talk about this kind of lone wolf phenomenon, but in one of those 4 pillars you spoke about prevention. How much more difficult is it to prevent a lone wolf, let's say a car ramming, than something of a much more organised and larger scale nature?
Well, a lot of the time an organised terrorist attack gives law enforcement, security services many more opportunities to intervene. There are more people involved. There are more networks involved.
And it's perhaps a longer process.
Of course, and there are many more means of communication involved. But it is an individual who may be sitting at home in their bedroom being inspired online. It's a very narrow focus for us to get into, and therefore, of course, it's challenging. But we rely very, very much on the community to be our eyes and ears and provide us wherever possible with the details of those individuals that may be causing concern. And our community policing plays a huge role in getting that information intelligence into the security services and police so that we can intervene at the earliest possible stage.
And if we're speaking about the community, you hear about these hotlines that people can call if they're afraid that their friend or cousin or someone that they know is potentially on an extremist radical path. What is then done with that information?
Well, all the information that comes into our anti-terrorism hotline is assessed, investigated and assessed. And we will take every snippet of information that comes in very, very seriously and develop it and investigate it to the fullest extent. And I would encourage people, if they are even slightly concerned about any individual who they think may be involved in terrorism or is acting abnormally, to get in contact with the police, and we will treat your information confidentially.
Right. Also, you have the potential to save lives by
Absolutely.
doing so.
That one snippet of information could indeed save lives.
But is it difficult to... You may be excellent in gathering the intelligence, but from a legal perspective, it's very difficult to act upon the prevention side, because let's say you suspect someone of doing something, until they've committed a crime, you obviously can't arrest them or charge them. Is that a challenge that you face?
Well, it is a challenge. It's not necessarily until they commit a crime that we can intervene. The law within the UK allows us to make interventions very early for those that are in the early stages of even planning a terrorist attack. So indeed, anyone that's preparing to commit a terrorist attack or supporting the preparation, etc., we are allowed to arrest and intervene at that very, very early stage. And of course, there are other ways that we do intervene. We have the Prevent programme in the UK, where we will work with our partners to identify individuals that are potentially vulnerable to extremism and radicalisation, and work with our partners, maybe in education or the health service, to try and get them off that path.
Okay, sounds like you've got there's a clear strategy in place.
Got a plan.
That's good. Always reassuring to hear. Tell us a bit about what you were doing here at the conference. You just finished now a workshop on catastrophe terrorism.
That's correct. So this is I'm privileged enough to be a speaker. This is my 2nd year that I've come to the conference, and this year I spoke on Monday the 11th regarding the UK response to the terrorist attacks in the UK in 2017. So London Bridge, Westminster Bridge and Manchester Arena. I gave a talk on how the UK responds as a whole, both in terms of the emergency services and our partners, to those attacks. And today I was asked to speak around the protective security and physical security arrangements within London that aim to prevent a catastrophic terrorist attack, and some of the measures that we have in place and some of the ideas for the future that we're going to have in place.
Okay, sounds super exciting. And what do you kind of come away from a conference like this with enhanced cooperation?
I think there are many pluses and advantages and benefits to coming to this conference. One of them is extending your network of people that are involved in the counter-terrorism world and learning from them. And after today, I have many, many contacts that when I go back to London, I will be making arrangements to speak to gather more learning and look at more cooperation, both here in Israel and across the world, share ideas, look at best practice, and it really works. And the opportunity to come to this conference here, for me, is an absolute goldmine of opportunity. It really is, and it's paid dividends already.
Well, we're really happy to have you here, and I hope you come back next year as well.
Well, thank you very much for the invite.
And thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Sabrina, thanks very much.